What's happening, everybody? Welcome into a brand new episode of Crossed Up on a Monday morning. Phillies lose 2 out of 3 to the Minnesota Twins. Good start, disappointing finish this weekend at Citizens Bank Park. Anthony, I'll bring you in. I got to cover the game that wasn't a stinker this weekend on Friday night. And it's funny because in my story after the game, Kepler hits the home run. And I thought to myself, this is just going to be one of those nights. Like this team was due for this type of game. It's probably going to get away from them. And then lo and behold, they come out and they smash Minnesota. I think I was on the right track. I was just a night too early, and we'll bring you in here. And I don't know. I think that it was a decent homestand, but a little underwhelming finish here.
Yeah, I mean, look, you can't go Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Washington, Minnesota, and go 6-4 at home. To me, look, it doesn't do a lot of damage. They're still the top wild card team, right? But again, and this is like I said last week, it only stretches it out one more day. So now when you lose games, like you lost the game to Washington in this homestand, and the game that you lost to the Royals in this homestand. Those are 2 days that you're going to have to compete longer in September than you probably want to, right? Look, I don't think either loss to the Twins, you sit there and go, oh my God, they should have won that game. How do they blow that game, or how do they lose that game? They faced 2 really good pitchers. There's a reason that they traded Luis Ariz for Pablo Lopez and then went and signed him to the contract that they signed him to. Guy's a good pitcher. Sonny Gray is a good pitcher. I mean, probably top 20, 25 in the game. And so you look at losing games to those 2 pitchers and you're like, well, it'd be nice to have gotten one, but okay, I understand why the offense struggled a little bit against those pitchers. So you got to look back, if you're going to look at the whole homestand, blowing the second game of the doubleheader against Washington and blowing the first game of the homestand against Kansas City. Those are games you can't lose. And so now this is what we talk about, that, you give up your mulligans, right? Too soon. Like, you probably aren't upset about losing these last 2 games to Minnesota if they win one of those games.
I'm going to do like a little role reversal with you here because I thought this myself. I'm like, they have to go at least 7-3. They probably could go 8-2 on this homestand, especially the way it starts. Like, yes, in hindsight, you look at losing the opener to the Royals, you look at losing the second game in the doubleheader to the Nationals, and that comes back to bite you a little bit. But you get to 6-2 on the homestand, you're feeling pretty good about where they're at. I don't know if they have to be better than this. Like, I don't know if they had to go 7-3 or 8-2. And I get it. I get your point about it lengthens this thing. It's another day that you have to try because you're burning these opportunities. But devil's advocate here, last year, and I know that, and I've been the one banging this drum all along, like last year is not this year. Just because something happened a year ago doesn't mean it's going to happen again this year. But what if I told you that maybe it's good that this team is going to have to sweat deeper into September? Maybe not from a health standpoint, maybe not from a usage standpoint, but we've seen this now, right? Where teams kind of coast that last month, coast over the last few weeks of the season, and then it's kind of hard for them to rev it back up when the games matter again. So, like, is there any value? Like, if I told you in a perfect world, like, yes, the Phillies are going to have the top wild card spot, but no, they're not going to clinch it until the last week of the season. Is that like a sweet spot, or is it like, man, wrap this thing up as soon as you can? And I know that if you're listening to this, because there's a lot of people that listen to our show that are like, the Phillies are not this good. You guys are giving them way too much credit. Like, this is going to be a fight to the finish, and it might be. But I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here a little bit.
I think that there is a danger when a team doesn't have to play a competitive game for a long time. I do. I think it hurts teams if you're way out in front and you haven't played anything that mattered. Like I think it hurt the Braves last year. In all honesty, I mean, right, and it could well hurt the Braves.
They hurt them again this year.
This year, right? I mean, seriously. So, like, yeah, those kind of things happen. But I do think that there's a benefit to being able to have that last week of the season be like, hey, let's treat it like spring training. Right. Let's get our guys their swings. Let's get our guys, but let's get them out of there, right? Let's only play partial games and things along those nature of that nature. I think there is a benefit to that as well. Being able to get, who needs the rest at this point? Let's be able to give them that rest kind of thing. I really do think that there's a benefit in that where, I'm not sitting here telling you the Phillies need to lock up the top wild card with 2 weeks to go in the regular season. But if those last 5-6 games are meaningless games and you're able to just set up your rotation the way you want to set it up and have guys have the rest that they need going into the playoffs, I think there's a big benefit to that, Bob. I really do. So I think I think there's a fine line. And it's funny, but you mentioned it, like Rob Thompson was talking about having these extra days off coming up this week, today off and Thursday off, and being able to get their starting pitchers a certain amount of extra rest. But he said there's also a thing where it becomes too much rest. He says you got to be careful with those guys. And so I think that's a legitimate thing too. And I think so when you really kind of piece it's a very fine line. So yes, you do want to compete long, to a certain point, but no, you don't want to be competing right up to the last minute either. So I think that you've got to thread that needle a little bit. And so maybe you're right. Maybe losing these 2 games helps thread that needle a little bit more, but it could also make it longer too. I think it could be a double-edged sword.
Well, one of our guys over at Crossing Broad, Tim Riley, says, this week was unbelievable. It was this crazy week with all of these highs, and then they only go 6-4 on this homestand. And I don't know if you saw my response to him. I said, that is the essence of the Phillies, where it's never quite as bad as it seems, but it's really never as good as it seems. And to that point, I want to raise 2 questions here, because I am not in this mindset of the sky is falling. And by the way, just take a look around at what's happening throughout the National League. Like, nobody's taking advantage of any vulnerability right now. Like, the Cubs had a nice weekend, 2 out of 3 up in Toronto. Like, I'll give them that. The Cubs continue to play well, but none of these other teams that are in contention are really, putting their foot on the gas and making that move right now. So I will say this. We got very excited because they hit around the Royals a little bit. They hit around the Nationals. And Washington does have some okay arms. Like, I'm not going to make it sound like it was all just Drek that they faced against Washington, but not great either. They run into Lopez on Saturday night. They get their doors blown off. Gray shuts them down for 6 innings yesterday. Probably could have been 7 or 8 if they were more aggressive with them. I'm surprised that they weren't. So is what we saw at the front of this homestand, and again, like the 6-4, like, I don't think the sky is falling, but is what we saw at the beginning of this homestand a little bit of a mirage? Like, they took advantage of brutal teams, brutal pitching, and then you see when they face competent to above average pitching, we're right back to where we were, 10 to 14 days ago, we're like, what the hell is up with this offense? Like, and granted, like, I also understand, like, and I feel like I have to put these disclaimers on these comments because, yeah, like, good pitching does shut down good offense. Like, we know that, like, around the sport. And that's when you have a good offense, you build up your numbers when you face substandard pitching. Like, that's how you do it. But for this team, for all the big 5 are back. Wow, they look like the machine that we thought that they were back in February. Like, I don't know. Like, that's where I kind of come back to, like, okay, how much of this can I really trust moving forward now?
No, it's a fair question, Bob. And I think that I think that it is what it is, right? I mean, the Phillies offense is not terrible like people think it is. It's also not as great as they think they can be. I just think they are what they are, which is somewhere in the middle. And that's okay if your pitching comes through, which we're going to talk about Taijuan Walker, I'm sure, today. And there's a situation where the pitching didn't come through. I mean, that game, even though they lose 8-1, if they even had, some semblance of pitching, I felt like they actually looked better, believe it or not, against Lopez than they did against Sonny Gray. I felt like there were a few more opportunities in that game. There were limited opportunities against Gray, whereas against Lope. I mean, look, Castellanos still had 2 hits against him, and Turner still had 3 hits in that game, and Harper he got hurt, so that wasn't a game he got hurt. He got a hit he had a hit in that game. I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. I might have to pull up my book here. But regardless, the point was they had some hits against Pablo Lopez that they didn't have yesterday. Harper had a hit in that game, and Real Muto had a hit in that game. So like, other than Schwarber, who did not have a good weekend, the big five were fine on Saturday. Didn't score the runs. They had their chances, but they were at least getting hits. So that tells you something, right? It tells you that, okay, you chalk that one up to, they had been doing really well on this homestand, and they were still hitting the ball, but they just didn't get the clutch hit in that game. All right, no big deal. Yesterday was a little bit more of pitcher dominance against them. So, I don't kill the team saying that they can't hit good pitching, because I think that they can. I think that they have this year at times been good against good pitchers. I mean, even in the game, I'll give you one example, Bob. Even in the game against Atlanta where they got roasted, it was on Sunday Night Baseball.
That was the Covey Strider game.
Yes. Yeah, the Dylan Covey start.
Yeah.
They got killed. But they still hit Spencer Strider pretty well in that game.
Mm-hmm.
Still hit him. And you kind of forget it because it's like, oh, they got blown out by the Braves, but the offense actually did their job in that game a little bit. So I think that they're, I don't want to put it in there that, oh, they're always going to struggle against good pitching and they're only going to hit bad pitching. But I do think you're right. I mean, this is how numbers are accumulated in baseball. You take advantage of bad pitching and you're going to struggle a little bit more against good pitching. It's just the way it is.
I look at, and I think where my biggest concern, and this is the one that I think is truly valid. Like, I think it's easy to overreact both positively and negatively when things are going well, things are going bad. And I think we got the spectrum of things this past homestand. I'm concerned, though, that even with established veterans, even with guys who have performed in big spots, I don't know if this team is able to execute when there's not a lot of margin for error. Like, that's what concerns me about this offense. And I'll tell you what troubled me yesterday is that they were dominated, but they also did have a few opportunities in what was a tight game and a very well pitched game both ways to put runs on the board, and they weren't able to bear down in those spots to do it. Now, you look at the second inning, they get first and third, 1 out. Garrett Stubbs strikes out, doesn't get a run in. Like, am I going to kill Garrett Stubbs in that situation? Like, because he's probably not catching in October, and if he is, like, that's a whole different set of problems, and that's not to be rude to Garrett, but like, that's not the plan. But like Kyle Schwarber, you come up in the second inning, bases loaded. You got a righty-lefty matchup here. Like, you're the guy. This is supposed to be a big spot in the game because you know that runs are going to be at a premium. And he puts together a bad at bat. You get later into the game, and I know there was the nonsense with the home plate umpire. I really just don't have like the tolerance for that. Like, we can get into it. Umpires around the league this year have been horrible. Yes, it was a ball to Bohm. But like, I also look at the batter before it comes back to Kyle Schwarber, pop up. Like, you've got to be able to bear down in situations when you know that there's going to be 2, 3, 4 runs scored max in a game. Like, you've got to execute in those spots. And the fact that they had those opportunities and they weren't able to do it. And then I think when you look at that and combine it with some of their struggles that they've had for prolonged stretches with runners in scoring position this year, like, I do wonder, like, is that something that is just going to ultimately doom this team? And you saw it happen yesterday. And I'm not trying to overreact to 2 at-bats by one player in one game. But I do think when you look at their performances in a whole, that there is some validity to this criticism, or this concern, I should say.
I mean, yeah. I mean, but then again, I break it down, Bob, and say that that's the same batter twice that we're going to highlight, and deservedly so. Schwarber did not do his job yesterday. you don't want to kill Stubbs. I don't want to kill Stubbs either. But there was also a situation there where they tried a safety squeeze.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
one
Get the
point,
bunt down, put the ball in play. With 2 strikes, hit a fly ball. Like, I get it. Like, I'm not trying. I don't want to. Yeah, I should probably like come back and say like he was on our show. I'm not trying to like protect the guy. He didn't do his job there. It was bad. But like also, I'm not looking to Garrett Stubbs
for sure
drive the engine here.
Yeah, but I mean, it's also like if he gets the run home from third, no matter how it's done, if safety squeeze or a fly ball, anything but the strikeout, right? Kind of changes the complexion of the game a little bit too, because you have that run early, right? It just kind of changes things. But Schwarber, to your point, I mean, his at bat in the second inning was maddening to people because he takes one strike, which was basically down the middle. And I get it. He likes to work the count sometimes and fine. He's going to end up taking pitches, and guys take pitches that are strikes, and you look at it and go, how can you take that pitch? Because they're working the count. It's what they're doing. But then the 2 strikes that he swung at were nowhere near the strike zone. And for a guy who's got as good an eye as Schwarber does, that's frustrating. And that's disappointing, right? Though that's what makes that at bat so hard to swallow, because he's the kind of guy who can work his way on base with a walk. He has that good of an eye. So what the hell are you swinging at? Right? What's the approach? That's concerning. And then of course, bases loaded, 1 out, and you have a bullpen on the ropes, that so much so that they had to take the guy out of the game and bring in Thielbar. Now I know it's lefty, and Schwarber struggles against lefties, but you gotta have a better at bat than that. You gotta.
Well, that's what you get. I mean, this whole conversation is Kyle Schwarber, 2023 Kyle Schwarber summed up. I mean, he hits the 2 home runs in the first game on Tuesday.
Correct.
And I think when he had hit the second one, it was his 30th of the year. And at the time I looked, he was mathematically pacing a 43 home run season at that point. And he's this morning tracking 41 home runs. He's on pace for 99 runs batted in, 120 walks, and 210 strikeouts. Yeah. And he has this game that he has yesterday, and I'm sort of a proponent of just leaving him in the leadoff because they think it works, or they like the way it feels, or whatever the hell. Like, we all understand he's not a leadoff hitter, but like I've kind of gone away from that conversation. Like, I tend to try to stay away from the topics that everyone just beats into the ground. But like you see these games, and I think that this is why everyone's so adamant and like passionate about the Kyle Schwarber leadoff conversation, because it's just a constant pissing match back and forth. He'll have those days where he goes nuts and you're like, tough day for the anti-Schwarber leadoff people. And then he has a game like yesterday where he looks unplayable and you're like, tough day for the Schwarber defenders. I mean, he has been so erratic, so inconsistent. And I mean, just again, like we said it a few weeks ago, I'm not sure that you'll ever see another season like this. Well, unless he's, after his contract expires, because I assume he'll probably do this again next year. I mean, it's a really like the volatility in his performance. It's tough to really like dig in on it and count on him because it's all over the map.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I would never, if I was constructing a lineup, I would never lead off Kyle Schwarber. But keep in mind, we're talking about a performance like yesterday where he comes up to the plate with runners on base in both cases. So in essence,
this is what you want.
This is why he's there, right? I mean, this is like people say he should bat in the middle of the order where he could drive in more runs. He had a chance to drive in plenty of runs yesterday and just didn't do it. So the thing of it is that the Phillies lineup, the way it's constructed, they're getting far more offense from further down the lineup now. And what I mean by far more offense is far more guys getting on base. So Schwarber has these chances and just is not coming through. So the question is, if he's going to do this, do you want to put him in the middle of the lineup? Right? I mean, it's the same thing. Like, where do you put this bat? Where do you hide it if you don't like it where it's at? I don't know. I just think that if you're going to run into some home runs, 41 home runs, which he's pacing for, you want to put him in spots where guys are going to be on base, and this was a perfect opportunity twice, and he just didn't get it done. And he was 0 for on Saturday as well. I think he was 0 for 5 on Saturday. At least he had a walk yesterday. Yeah, he was 0 for 5 Saturday. Guess how many guys he left on base Saturday? 5.
Yeah. So tough weekend. I mean, it's almost like, is it too simplistic to say, hey, as Kyle Schwarber, your leadoff hitter goes, the Phillies offense goes? I mean,
there you. I mean, well, to be fair, Bohm was also 0 for 4 on Friday night,
yeah.
right? So top of the order just did nothing for them. Around Saturday night, the top of the order did nothing for them. But I mean, again, there were 3 times he came up in that game on Saturday with runners on base, runners in scoring position. The 5th inning, he had first and second, popped out, left 2 runners on base. 7th inning, he had a runner at third with 2 out, popped out to the first baseman. And then in the 9th inning, he comes up with 2 guys. Now, again, the game's over at that point.
Yeah.
But he comes up with 2 guys on base and strikes out. So he ends up leaving 5 guys on base. He's coming up in their Phillies are putting runners on base for Kyle Schwarber. I think that's why you don't move him at this point, and I would never lead him off. And like I said, as a manager, I would never lead him off. But I think I see why the Phillies are doing it, and they know that, hey, here's a guy who can drive in runs when we have guys on base, and here's when he's getting the most opportunity to do it. He just didn't do it this weekend.
All right, I think we have to talk about Taijuan Walker, because if the Phillies lost the last 2 games 2-1, 2-1, I'd say, okay, no big deal, whatever. Maybe we'd still be having this conversation, but I think in addition to we lost a series against the Twins, if I'm the Phillies, I'm also saying we might have a problem with Taijuan Walker. And it's funny because we talk about the wins, his ability to shake off slow starts and then give them quality starts and be competitive, and all of that remains true. It's not like he went out and gave up 10 runs in 3 innings the other night. But there's an issue here, and we've talked about it at length. This velocity thing and the way that he comes out and starts games is real. The difference on Saturday night was that he never recovered. We've seen an uptick after that first inning, that second inning. He gets into the middle innings, and you're like, okay, wow, pretty impressive start. There's a problem here, and I do want to give you some numbers before I get your thoughts on, A, what they're going to do, B, should that be what they do, and C, where do you think this goes beyond that?
Yeah.
But I will just throw this out here. Last August, he made 5 starts, and he put together a 6.98 ERA, and he only pitched 19 and a third innings in those 5 starts. I mean, he got beat up, a 1.655 whip. His strikeouts per 9, 6.1. Like, he lost his stuff to a degree this time last year, and he struggled mightily this time last year. So there's a little bit of a track record for this. Now, if you're looking for some positive sign in this little mess right now, I would say, yeah, okay, now you come back to September, he manages to make, I believe, the same amount of starts. The ERA dips into the high 3s. Like, he did recover to a degree down the stretch at the end of last season. But you dig into what I think the biggest issue right now is, which is the velocity. This season, his four-seam fastballs averaged 93.7 miles per hour. Or I'm sorry, that was last season. This year, just across the entire season, it's down to 93.1. So he's already just season to season, year over year, lost about half a mile per hour on his four-seam fastball, which may not seem like a lot, but that's actually a pretty significant dip over 1 year. So he's averaging 93. The other night, he averages 91.2 with it. And, I mean, there were several pitches where he didn't even get there, like where he was sitting like 88, 89. Like, what do you make of this? Like, I know they're going to give him extended rest. Is that going to be enough to fix it? Like, do they really have to think about how much they can trust him as this thing goes down the stretch now?
I think Taijuan Walker is what Taijuan Walker is. Like, I'm glad you brought up last season, because, I had his game log pulled up to talk about this, because, in the second half last year, he wasn't nearly as good as he was in the first half of the season. I think he had I think his ERA was 2.63 at the All-Star break last year, and he finished at 3.49, right? So so his second half was bad. And you look at it's interesting. Like, you talk about those August starts last year. Well, to be fair, one of them was against the Braves, got smoked, gave up 8 earned runs in 1 inning, and then didn't, and that was it. And then his other 4 starts were just mediocre. They were okay. They were just like what we've been getting from him, right? 5, 6 innings, gives up a couple of runs, but he keeps you in the game, and the team has a chance to win. Those were those. And then September, it's almost like he was more of the same, right? And you look at it and go, okay, 5 runs, 4 earned against Pittsburgh. Well, that's not good. But then he bounces back with 7 runs, 1 earned against the Marlins with 10 strikeouts. Oh, okay. Then it's right back to 7 1/3, 3 runs against Pittsburgh. Pretty good. Hung in there. Milwaukee, 6 runs, 4 earned. Get out, right? Miami, 5 runs, 5 innings, 3 earned. And he's out. And then 4 1/3 in his last start of the season. So, like, it's like he's hit or miss. And I think that that's really what Taijuan Walker is. Yeah, he's 13-5, and the Phillies have won 17 of his 24 starts. He's had some good run support. He keeps you in games, but he's exactly what a number 4 starter is supposed to be. A guy that doesn't get blown out, and a guy that, can keep you in the game, but he's a guy you can't count on to just be dominant. And that's all there is to it. He is what he is.
He is what he is. And when you look at the numbers and you give me they've won these starts, he keeps you in games. He's been competitive. Sometimes he's effective. Sometimes he's not great. Like I'm down for all of that. But I would tell you, like, just looking through this, I'm on the Baseball Savant page from the other night, looking at his velocity. He threw 1 pitch over 93 miles an hour the entire night. 1 pitch. Most of those fastballs that he threw were sitting 90 to 91. The splitter, or, the sinker, I'm sorry, sitting like 88. The splitter and the sinker, 88, 89. Like that's not good. And like if the velocity was where it was and like the results were mixed as they are, I'd say like, okay, yeah. But like is this where he's going to remain, or can he get it back up to where he would want to be? Like, and is it dead arm? Is it something in his routine? Why can't the Phillies fix it if he has it in him? Like when you look at those starts against Miami 2 starts ago, you look at what he did against Kansas City, like it's in his arm. He has it in there. So where is it? And why can't they untap it? Like, and I think that to me is the question right now.
Yeah, it really is. And because, and I did ask him after the game, I said, is part of the problem with not being able to have good control, because obviously he was walking a ton he walked 6 guys the other night. I says part of the problem not having good control, the fact that they know that you have no velocity and they're basically just spitting on your breaking stuff. And he goes, yeah, he's like, they've seen my last couple starts. They know I've become a breaking ball heavy pitcher, and so therefore they're just going to sit there and take those pitches. And they're not swinging and missing at the splitter, right? For example, which is his best pitch. So yeah, I mean, he's aware of it. He says you can't throw 90 fastballs at 90 in the majors and expect to be successful. He said it himself. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it has to get back to 94 on the sinker so that he can set up the slider and the curveball that he has to be more effective pitches. Otherwise, you're going to get an outing like you got for Saturday.
If
he only gave up 3. This is how lucky he was. He gave up 3 hits in the game. 2 of them were solo home runs. So he only got 1 real hit other than the home run, like a ball that was at a fielder, that was hit at a fielder. 6 walks and a hit by pitch in 5 innings. He only got 3 runs. So it's like one of those games where you're like, how the hell did he only give up 3 runs? But he still finds a way. So there's something that, like, you got to appreciate that about him as a pitcher, that he finds a way to keep the damage at a minimum for the most part. But he knows he can't keep throwing pitches the way he's throwing pitches and expect to be a solid contributor to this team.
So if I were to ask you to play therapist for a moment, you're standing there next to him, you ask him the question, you hear him talking. Frustration or self-doubt? Like, what did you get out of it? Like, you talk to players, you kind of know where sometimes these guys are at in terms of when they struggle. What's their headspace? Where are they? Where do you think he is right now?
I don't think that he's uh I don't think that he's in a bad headspace. I just, I think that I get the sense that like he's experienced this before and he knows
Mhm.
that this kind of happens to him. And he was pretty, pragmatic about it. He was basically like, look, just need a little extra rest, And he's not the only one. I mean, look, guys do this in baseball now. I mean, we even saw it where the greatest player of all time is skipping a start because he said his arm's tired. And Shohei Ohtani, right? It said that his arm's tired and he needs more time off. And that's a guy who doesn't throw that many innings to begin with, right? He only throws every sixth day to start off. He's only thrown 130 innings this year. That's just where the game is. It's where guys are. It's how they train to pitch nowadays. And so, he's told them, oh, it's August. This happens to me in August. Well, all right. Well, if he's used to it, then I'm not, I don't get it. I don't understand why if it happens, like you can't figure out how to prevent it from happening. But okay, at least that's where his head is. Like he doesn't seem like it's bothering him.
All right, I have two other things that I wanted to dig into specifically, and then anything else you want to hit on or tackle here. But we'll keep it with the starting rotation right now, and let's move to Ranger Suarez because it has not been great for him in July and this month. I thought that the other night against Washington, he took a step forward. I didn't think he was sharp necessarily. Kind of got hurt on the home runs, but okay, given where he was at, I thought it was a step forward. I thought he threw the ball pretty well yesterday. He goes 6 1/3. He allowed 6 hits, 3 walks, maybe a little bit more on the walks than I'd like to see, but 8 strikeouts was finally kind of generating some strikeouts, which have been down for him a little bit recently. You feel like he's kind of where he needs to be right now? Because all year I've sort of been trying to figure out where he's at. Like he had the weird spring, he was delayed, he came out, started the season, he was a mess, then he was phenomenal for a month, and then has kind of just been trying to find it, I feel like. And my interpretation yesterday was that we would have come away from that start and said, wow, that was a huge step in the right direction. He looked really good, had the Phillies hit. But because they fell behind early, he gives up a home run early. You're like, all right, I think that was a decent start. I guess I'm just trying to ultimately where I'm going with this. We had a conversation last week, and I asked you about the rotation and what it might look like in the playoffs. And your response to that was like, so much can happen between now and then, which I agree. And we can't just react to the most recent start and then try to project out a playoff rotation because of it. But ultimately, I can't help but think about, okay, Wheeler, Nola, even if you don't think he should be the game 2 starter, he's going to be. And I don't mean you, but I mean someone listening to this. But then what? And so every start for me is trying to figure out what the hell is this thing going to look like?
Well, I think a lot will depend on the opponent, Bob. And I think that you're probably looking at a situation where Suarez is a scheduled starter against some opponents, but some opponents he may be a guy that you want to bring out of the pen. I think in the 3 games, the more I think about it, in the 3-game series, he's probably a starter.
Well, let me give you this. In a world where they play the San Francisco Giants in that first round,
yeah,
I'm just going to throw this out here. The Giants have the 4th worst OPS against left-handed pitching.
Yeah,
this season. So if it's the Giants, you would almost, to me, right there, as long as he's okay down the stretch, I think that answers the question against the Giants.
For sure. And I wouldn't, and I don't think that if you look at the Cubs, which is I think your next best possibility of the opponent being in the opening round, I don't care what I think that you like Suarez just because it would be an elimination game,
yeah.
And that he's the guy that you like having in those in those high pressure spots because he doesn't wilt in the moment. In a longer series, I wonder a little bit, Bob, is he more of a short start but available out of the pen most of the other time kind of guy? Especially if you need a lefty in a tight spot in like the 6th or 7th inning, or to go multiple innings. Is he a guy that you look at and say, we'd rather bring Ranger Suarez in here than Gregory Soto or Matt Strahm? And I do think that there's going to be some versatility there. I do think there's going to be some flexibility there where he is that guy that can be brought out of the pen. But at the same time, I think I'm not convinced that Lorenzen's definitely going into the bullpen.
Right.
I'm not convinced of it. Maybe, like I said, maybe in the 3-game series he is, but beyond that, I think if Lorenzen keeps pitching well, I think Lorenzen's a starter in the playoffs in the second round, and then anything beyond that.
If you're watching this on YouTube, like you see me smiling right now a little bit, as you're talking, and like we're talking about these like left-right splits, it just I just have to say, I know the Phillies beat the Braves in the postseason last year. And I think because that happened, we're all sort of downplaying what the 2023 Atlanta Braves are.
Yeah.
This team is unbelievable. Like, I'm looking at this, right? And I'm like, okay, how are they hitting against left-handed pitching this year? And as a team, they have an 892 OPS against left-handed pitching, which is the best in all of baseball. The second best team against lefties this year is the Texas Rangers, and the OPS is 825. Like, they're nowhere even close to what Atlanta's done. And then I'm saying to myself, okay, well, obviously they're just tearing apart left-handed pitching. How do they stack up against righties this year? And they have the best OPS against right-handed pitching at 833, and the next best team is the Texas Rangers at 794. Like, they are an absolute machine offensively. And I know they haven't been great in the second half. They're probably a little bit bored. They took apart the Mets just at the seams this week, and I know they lost last night, but they destroyed that team. Dude, like, are we all just like kidding ourselves here? Like, are we all just like playing make believe about like a deep playoff run? Like, this Atlanta team, are they seriously going to bow out again in the second round, in their opening round for a second straight year, as good as this team is?
I don't think so. I think that the Braves are, we would be foolish to not pick the Braves. I mean, really, we'd be foolish to not pick the Braves. But the one thing I keep telling everybody is, if there's a team that is constructed in such a way to beat the Braves in a short series, it's the Phillies. And so if you're going to face them and you got to beat them to go where you want to go, you might as well face them early.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Because I think that's the best chance you have of beating them. Yeah. So, like, I look at it and say, yeah, I mean, the Braves are going to be, if the Phillies get through, which they should, and the Braves are there, and that's your matchup, the Braves are still going to be the favorite. The Braves are probably going to win the series. But if you're going to have a shot to beat them, that's where you want them. And the Phillies have the roster to do it. But I don't know if they get it done.
All right. The other thing that I have on my notes here is Trea Turner. So he gets that hit late in yesterday's game, keeps the hitting streak intact. I believe, did he have a hit in every game of the homestand? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
That is correct. Yeah.
So his OPS, his OPS after yesterday sits at 701. I had tweeted out the other night that it was the first time since May 17th his OPS was over 700. Obviously, he's in a much different place than he was 10 games ago. Here's my question to you now. And we touched on this last week, Friday, because it was right in the middle of that breakout streak. And he had a good weekend, too. Are we at a point where we can trust him to sort of, I'm not saying he's got to play at an MVP level. I'm not saying that he's going to be this guy that he was during this homestand here on out. But we know that he was able to some degree ride the wave, the momentum of everything that happened with the fans. Like that, I think you can say to some extent was real. That's going to wear off though. Like that moment has sort of passed. It's in the rear view now, and now they're going to go back out on the road, and the season is going to continue as it will. Is this fixed? Like is he over this now?
I mean, you hope so. I mean, again, when you look at it, he had 3 hits in the game against Lopez, 2 of them against Lopez, and a walk, right? So he did well against Lopez. He didn't do as well against Sonny Gray, but then again, no one did, and he didn't get his hit until the final at bat of the game of the game. I guess was at the 9th inning, right, when he got his hit yesterday. But I don't know. I look at it and say, yeah. I mean, I think that he's probably figured some things out. I think that there's a little bit of pressure taken off of him. With the ovations and things like that. Okay, great. That's good. I mean, look, no, I don't think. I think multiple things can be true here. I'm going to take a Kevin Kincaid line and say multiple things can be true here. I do think he found something in his approach and the way he was going at it at the plate to become a little bit more disciplined. I think he admitted that he was being too aggressive at times, trying to fix things and trying to get out of it, and so that he kind of maybe relaxed a little bit and pulled back a little bit. And I think maybe does he feel that it was easier to do that because he knew that he wasn't going to be destroyed by the fans with every at bat with a boo. Okay, that's cool. But I do think that he's on the right path. I mean, yes, a lot of those at bats came against bad pitching, but I liked what I saw, especially Saturday night against Lopez, where everybody else was kind of struggling and he still was having good at bats, and he was still on those pitches and flat bat through the zone, hitting the ball all over the field. It looked like Trea Turner. And so I do think that this is something that is not just a happy homestand and then it's going to go back to what it was all season beforehand. I do think we're going to get consistently good at bats from Turner going forward.
Let me give you a scenario here, I guess 2 scenarios, and you tell me which is the more likely. From here to or through the remainder of the season, his last 15 games, he's hitting .317. And remember, like 5 of those 15 games were prior to this homestand where he was at his lowest point. But 15 game rolling totals here, hit .317, 892 OPS. In his last 30 games, he's hitting .256 with a 721 OPS. What is more likely to be his stat line moving forward? That 30 game rolling average or the 15 game rolling average?
That's a good question.
You can't middle it. You can't be a coward and say somewhere in between. even though that's most likely.
You're forcing.
No, how about this? All right, I'm going to give you an out here. Over under Trea Turner's OPS the remainder of this season, 800.
That's a good one. I'll take the over.
Okay. All right.
And the only reason I'm taking
you think it's fixed then.
But I'll give you the caveat as to why I'm taking the over.
Because they play the Mets.
Because of who they're playing. Yeah, I do think that there's something to that, right? I mean, really, let's look ahead. What are the only tough games they have left pitching wise? You're going to face the Braves. You got a series against the Brewers and a series in San Diego. Really, what else do you got?
Well, I'll tell you what. It's funny because this actually transitions to exactly what I was going to get to next, which is the Blue Jays this week. When you look at the Toronto Blue Jays, you think, at least I do from afar, I'm like, man, they'll look at the firepower they have in their lineup, and they can really, really score against you and do a lot of things. They're 16th in runs per game this season.
Yeah.
Like they're scoring fewer runs per game than the Phillies are, who are 13th, and they were actually up to 11th after Friday night, but they had a rough go of it. You look at the Blue Jays, they are first in baseball in runs allowed this season, 4.01 runs per game. Like they've really thrown the baseball well, and it's a big reason that they're still within reach of a postseason spot because that offense has been underwhelming.
It has. And yeah, they're a weird team in a lot of ways because I think at the beginning of the year, you and I looked at them and thought, "There's your American League champion this year," and they've looked nothing like a team that makes you think that they're going to be the American League champion this year. I think they're going to get in the playoffs, and they could be. Who knows? Maybe once you flip to October and the stat lines are cleared and everybody's 0 for 0, maybe that changes and maybe they are a little bit better. But um, look, it's not going to be these games in Toronto are never easy. They're not going to be easy for the Phillies. But again, I'm not looking at it and sitting there going, "Oh, they're facing some dominant pitching these 2 games." They're not. They're just not. And then they got Washington again. We know what Washington's pitching's like, right? So, Giants have 1 or 2 good pitchers, starting pitchers, but they also throw a ton of bullpen innings, which we were talking about offline yesterday. And like I look ahead and I say, Turner's going to just be Turner. I think I don't look at it and go, "Oh, they have a terrible stretch and he's going to fall back into a funk against these good pitchers, and then it'll be back to what we've seen most of this year, and this would just be a blip." No, I think that this is setting up nicely for him to keep it going. So I'm going to go the over on the 800.
Okay.
Yeah.
You look at this week coming up and you have this bizarre day off, 2 games, day off, Washington, Williamsport. Like, what do you expect out of the Phillies this week, or what do you need to see from them? I mean, every time that they have a homestand or a road trip, we talk about, hey, this should be the target. This is what they need to do. So what do they need to do here?
It's only 5 games, and it's 5 games on the road in 3 different places, right? Which is weird.
Right.
So I'm going to say 3-2.
Okay.
Split the games in Toronto, split the games in Washington, and win the national game in Williamsport, because it'll be like a home game up there basically. We have the local little league team playing up there. You're going to have all of Delco in Williamsport. I think you're going to get a lot of Phillies fans making the commute to that game. I think it is what it is. I think that's one that they need to win. So I think it'll be 3 out of 5, and you're probably coming home next Monday for the Giants and feeling okay about it.
Big series there. I can't wait for that series.
Yeah, I mean, you would think. I mean, the Giants got lucky yesterday, or was it yesterday? Yesterday. They almost blew the game.
Well, I know how much you dislike that team. Like, and not that you hate them, but that you just don't think they're any good. And I know that you think that this Phillies team, like, I think that to the average person, like, you are more bullish on the Phillies than the average person is.
Yeah.
That's fair to say, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So it's just like, it's one of those series where I can't lose, because either the Phillies win and they kind of grow the lead, or they get beat up by the Giants and Gabe Kapler, and then I get to come on this show and go, "Yo, Ant, what happened, man? What happened?" So I'm looking forward to that. I mean, seriously, that's a series for me. Like, the Phillies are better than the Giants. They are at home. Like, show up and do this, right?
Well,
like,
so here's a question, and we're talking about Taijuan Walker earlier. Just to circle back to that just for a second. So we asked, and I was perplexed by this, Bob. We asked Rob Thompson about the pitching rotation Sunday morning. Again, like, we followed up again just to clarify what's happening. And Walker is not pitching this week, and he was originally supposed to start the game next Sunday in Williamsport, and is not. Suarez is going to start that game. So he wouldn't commit to a rotation beyond Sunday. But he was asked, is there a chance Walker will pitch against the Giants? And he said, yeah, they'd like him to. And right now you're set up to have it go Wheeler, Nola, Lorenzen against the Giants. Are you of the mindset that an uncertain Taijuan Walker is a better option than any of those 3 at this point, and pushing one of them to St. Louis the following Friday?
Yeah, I mean, I hear you.
Like, it doesn't make any sense to me with that series meaning what it means for the playoffs. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me why you would trot Walker back out at that point. Like, just save him an extra couple days, let him pitch the first game of the St. Louis series on Friday night, just to make sure, because Are we crossing our fingers against a team that you need to beat? Like that was perplexing to me to get that response. And who knows? They may not do it. They may wait. They may hold off Walker until the Cardinals, and this could be some, early alarmist stuff from me. But I don't. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So
I don't know where to get this into the show. I wanted to circle back to this though. I feel like I just have to. Has nothing to do with it has something to do with the Phillies, but doesn't have anything to do with the current Philly. Can we just talk about something that probably came up about 5 weeks ago, and that is Mickey Moniak. I just wanted to touch on this. I just can't. I know
Bob,
I sound
Bob, are you doing one last thing today? Are we reversing roles?
Is this going to be your thing?
It wasn't. I was actually going to bring up something that's probably a little bit more serious, but this is fine. Go ahead. This is better. This is better than mine. Go ahead.
I didn't go back and look at the tweet. Like I think it was about a month ago. Everyone was going crazy 5 weeks ago about Mickey Moniak and how like the Angels unlocked his number 1 overall pick potential, and did the Phillies make a mistake in making the deal for Syndergaard? And why couldn't the Phillies figure this out? And okay, and listen, I mean, he was hitting like well over 300. His OPS was over 1,000. It was all against right-handed pitching, but hey, whatever. That you can be a very useful player even if you are, have wildly extreme platoon splits. No problem with that. Like, and good for him, by the way. Like, and I'll even preface all of this by saying, like, I'm pretty sure what he's done now has bought himself a few years as a Major League Baseball player, just because he's been pretty intriguing against right-handed pitching this year. But his last 15 games, he's hitting 150 with a 410 OPS. He struck out 27 times. He's drawn 2 walks. Mm-hmm. In 46 at-bats against left-handed pitching, because the Angels, like, they're like, hey, all right, let's see what we have in this kid. Like, they're actually letting him hit against lefties more now. He's got a 309 OPS in 46 at-bats against left-handed pitching this season. And his baseline stats, like his overall stats, he's still hitting 289, which is solid, and has an 841 OPS, which is solid and much better than pretty much any Phillies regular. But those numbers where they were 5 weeks ago, or they're in a very much different place now. And if I had to guess, and if I had to bet, I think I know which way they're going to continue to move. All of this is to say, like, because I know I sound like salty and bitter, or like that I'm rooting against the guy. I'm not. It has nothing to do with him, and it has nothing to do with him on a personal level. But like, this is why everybody needs to like calm the fuck down and realize that, like, no, the Phillies did not trade away a future Hall of Famer for a fifth starter down the stretch last season. Like, I'll say what I said then. Like, I would make that trade every day of the week. And even if Mickey Moniak turns into a 10-year player where he's a solid contributor at the major league level, that is an ultimate. If there was ever a change of scenery trade that had to happen, it was that one. I'm not here to give the Phillies, like, they don't need me to defend them. I will criticize them at every possible term when warranted. I got nothing for you on that trade. I don't know how you can look at that and say that they screwed up there.
Mickey Moniak stinks, Bob.
Well,
I'll say it.
That's fine. Thank you.
I'll say it. Mickey Moniak gave the Angels the Dom Brown month, is what he gave the Angels. And maybe his career ends up being Dom Brown, because I think that's very similar paths. Okay. Yeah. But okay. Maybe Moniak was never considered the number 1 overall prospect in the minor leagues like Dom Brown was at that one point. But it is a very similar thing. First overall draft pick. Dom Brown was considered the best prospect in minor league baseball. Finally comes up, gets that chance, has that monster, month and a half. Everybody thinks, here we go. This is the breakout superstar. It's going to happen. And then over the course of the next 2.5 seasons becomes next to nothing, and then is out of baseball. I think that's what you're going to get out of Mickey Moniak. He's going
Anthony,
to be Dominic Brown.
I was just trying to sound like well researched and fair. And
I'd just be blunt about it.
In essence, I am with you on this, but I was just trying to be a little bit more,
Bob, I appreciate it. I appreciate
Yeah.
it, but sometimes I'm just going to speak plainly about it.
I love that. I love
Yeah,
that.
he
Do,
stinks.
do you want to end it on that? Was that the one last thing, or do you have
It
something
was
there?
not my one last thing. With one last thing I wanted to throw at you, and I don't know enough about it because it's just kind of like happened breaking kind of yesterday, last night, and I've been trying to find more on it, and maybe I just don't know where to go to the right places to get the gory details that the mainstream media people don't want to talk about. But Wander Franco, have you seen this?
No, I know. I know. It's
Like,
not good. It's not
nah,
good.
yeah, like
Listen,
he,
here, I actually I don't want to even to be honest with you, I don't really want to go into this. I would just say, I would say that the details that they reported were that he was in the dugout. It was a scheduled day off. He was in the dugout for the first half of that
yeah,
game yesterday. Story comes out. He was no longer in the dugout. He's not traveling with
not
them.
traveling with the team. Yeah,
I just, there's internet rumors that are unfounded, and maybe that's ultimately what this is. But a lot of times, like the initial way that like a team or a player will react in the moment, kind of I think indicates what like could be potentially happening here, or like what may happen. And like this response, like I know you have to treat it seriously, right? But I think like this response is like, hey, you have to at least look at the way that they've initially handled this, and you go, oh boy, you know.
yeah,
So
and not only that, like earlier this year, wasn't he? Was he suspended for a game or something
yeah, they
happened because
benched him. They benched him
for
because he was not being a
not a
good
good teammate?
teammate. Was the way
Yeah,
it was worded, which I don't know
yeah.
exactly what goes into that. But that's not good. That story's no good.
No, and again, you're talking about a young up and coming star who may be quickly derailing his path.
Yeah, I was curious to see like the way like you said like they haven't really like the mainstream hasn't really gone into it yet, but like this morning I was like I wonder, are we going to see this? And I think that on ESPN it is one of the top stories on the
Is it?
website
Okay.
as we talk right now. So I mean there's at least an acknowledgement that there's an inquiry going on here where, I mean you certainly hope for everyone's sake that that's not true. So
Right.
that's all.
Right.
That's all I can really say about that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
these athletes today have to learn, Bob.
yeah,
Just it's going to live there forever. So either don't. So just don't do it. Like
yeah,
I don't understand why they feel the need to put stuff out there. Just don't do it, man. Just don't do it. You're ruining the chance at your life being set forever. Like
yeah.
I don't
It's a
understand why athletes do these things. It just
yeah. It's a terrible story. That's one where you just kind of it's like wait and see here how this kind of plays out. So
yeah,
all right. Well, the Phillies this week we'll see. You know what I mean? I think that what I would love to see them do to me, like a sign of a really good team is when you kind of let it get away from you a little bit. You lose the series to Minnesota. I think it's reasonable to go up there, especially with Nola Wheeler, say like, hey, you got to get at least a split up there, right? And I think that that's probably the likely outcome. But go steal one here. Like go up there and get both, and you say, okay, now that Minnesota series, we just undid that. It's
yeah,
like 1-2 out of 3, and then we split, and then we move forward. I'd like to see them go out there and do it. And really, I think more importantly, as always is the case, and I'm sure we'll talk about this on Friday. Like, hey, Aaron Nola, go up there and have one of those games that we know you can have. I'd like to see that.
yeah. Well, I think everybody would like to see
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
So we'll see.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to Crossed Up. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at AntSamPhilly. You can follow the show account at UpPhillies. You can follow me at Bob_Wankel. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. I think is that what it's called. Anywhere else you get your shows, and then also on YouTube. And we will talk to you soon.